In 1991, the residents of Strathfield were left traumatised when a man opened fire in a local shopping plaza. In just 10 short minutes, the gunman unleashed a wave of terror that would become the most violent and shocking in Sydney's history.
I think people were horrified. Just couldn't believe that this would happen in Australia.
Armed with a machete, a rifle and 100 rounds of ammunition, the unidentified gunman burst into action, stabbing and shooting at those within close range.
The first shots rang through the plaza, packed with Saturday afternoon shoppers, just after 3:30.
I did look out and I could see a person lying on the floor, obviously had been shot.
It was all done within such a short space of time.
Just a random attack of violence.
It was a semi-automatic weapon. That gave him the ability to kill a lot of people.
When people are killed under those sort of circumstances, that just becomes the news of the day, the news of the week.
That's what his whole ambition was, to kill as many people as possible.
The abhorrent actions of one man that day changed the lives of a tight-knit community forever and left physical and mental scars that are still felt today. The Strathfield Massacre was a crime that shook Australia. In August 1991, 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong met up with her friend at the Coffee Pot, a popular and central cafe inside Strathfield Plaza.
She was a shy, demure young lady, gorgeous young girl. She loved ballet. She was very involved in her academic studies, and she also played the flute. Everybody liked her. She was just one of those really sweet Year 10 girls.
Also inside the cafe that day, enjoying a weekend of shopping and sightseeing, was Joyce Nixon, daughter Patricia Rowe, and Rowe's sons, aged 9 and 14. Amidst the crowds of families and friends inside the cafe sat a solitary figure, absorbed in thought. His next move would leave 7 people dead. Celebrated as one of the most culturally diverse areas of Sydney, Strathfield is an inner west suburb just 14 kilometres from Sydney City and its surrounding harbour.
Strathfield was a place that was a safe haven for everybody.
We had our friends in the area. We really didn't go outside Strathfield for friendships, and our whole life centred in Strathfield.
It's a real community. It's centred around families. We all go to the same sports on Saturday morning. We all pitch in and help at the sausage sizzle. It's a great place to live.
Strathfield Plaza opened in 1981 as a single-storey retail shopping centre and a 2-level car park. Helen and Jeff Boyce owned and operated the Strathfield Plaza news agency from 1989 to 1993.
We were very comfortable here. We'd been here for quite a number of years and we knew lots of people. People came into the shop, we were happy to talk to them. Kids came into the shop, younger kids that we were used to talking to, and we were just completely safe and happy. It was our whole life, actually, our whole life.
Saturday afternoon at Strathfield Plaza in Sydney's western suburbs on the 17th of August, 1991. Inside, the usual hustle and bustle of late afternoon shoppers, families and shopkeepers going about their business.
Well, it was a busy day, always a busy day. People would be rushing in to get things at the last minute. There would be families, the kids would come and want to buy magazines. It was just a normal day. For some reason, Jeff said, oh, well, I'll come to the shop as well today. So he was there too, and then in the afternoon there was Jeff, myself, and one of the young girls, Rachel.
One local shopper visiting Strathfield Plaza that Saturday was 41-year-old Greg Reed, an ex-Navy officer who had also served in Vietnam.
There's a hardware store inside Strathfield Plaza, so I had to go and get a toilet seat. And while I was there, I went next door to the paper shop.
The day continued just like any other. But just before 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, the regularity of Strathfield life and the safe and vibrant community they enjoyed would be changed forever.
I think at that time Jeff was sitting out in the office doing something, and we were sort of getting ready to close up when this really strange noise appeared.
I just happened to be buying the newspaper, and that's where it all started.
It sounded like metal trays being dropped on the terrazzo floor. And before I had time to think much more, this young lass came running round from the bread kiosk and said, there's a man round there with a gun and he's shooting.
In a sudden and frenzied attack, the man brutally stabbed 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, who sat directly behind him. The young schoolgirl had no chance to defend herself. Before customers could react, he grabbed a semi-automatic rifle from his satchel and opened fire inside the busy cafe.
Since I heard the screams and the shooting, I became alert. I sort of heard the shots being fired. I looked straight out the shop and there was sheer panic. A lot of people ran into the shops.
Within minutes, the shopping centre became a scene of chaos. The gunman, having stunned shoppers in the cafe, was now shooting randomly at people in the plaza.
There were 10 people in our shop, plus the three of us, and we herded them all into our little back office, which probably measured about...
2 metres by 2 metres.
They didn't have time to close their shops. Most of the shopkeepers got all their customers to go to the back of the shop, and that was the only defence they had.
It was very tight. We were standing like shoulder to shoulder, and then I just happened to see another lady hiding behind the card racking, and I pulled her in too.
People were hiding behind anything they could find.
And there we were, standing there not knowing what was happening.
I saw people fleeing and I saw people laying down. And that's when I saw one person being shot in front of me.
On a busy Saturday afternoon, Strathfield Plaza would have hundreds of visitors, and that day in 1991 was no different. As the gunman moved away from the cafe, he opened fire on anybody in his sight.
I did look out and I could see a person lying on the floor, obviously had been shot, and one shot had been fired at the chemist, which was next door to us. By this time we did sense there was someone with a gun. We had no idea where that person was in the plaza.
Still unaware of the gunman's whereabouts, Jeff and Helen Boyce hid. Greg Reed began to track his movements in the hope the gunman could be stopped.
When I saw him downstairs, I could see that he was trying to imitate a commando person, but he wasn't a commander. He wasn't calm in anything he was doing. He wasn't panicking either.
I contacted the police and I wasn't able to give them any information, but they held me on the phone in case I could see something.
I went from the newspaper shop out into the shopping area, and there's a set of stairs that go upstairs to the car parks. I actually went up to the first level. That's when I discovered that he's not shooting anybody laying down. So that's what I had to do, get everybody to lay down. I thought, I've got to save people from this man. I sort of said, well, hit the deck. There's a gunman behind me and he's killing people. Very simple. He actually got wind of me doing this, and he saw that I was getting people to lay down, and he saw me in the ramp, on the ramp, trying to locate him. And he deliberately came to the next level above me, purposely come towards shooting myself. I then went up to the next level, and I wanted to find out where he was. So I looked over the parapet, and he looked up to see where I was and fired 2 shots at me.
In 1991, as people enjoyed an afternoon shopping inside Sydney's Strathfield Plaza, an unknown assailant launched into a sudden and violent rampage. Greg Reed, a local Strathfield resident, had been observing the gunman whilst trying to warn people of the danger. Inadvertently, he had caught his attention and was faced with the gun himself.
That was very close. The bullets came very close to my face.
Having narrowly missed being shot himself, Greg was determined to warn as many people as he could of the danger they found themselves in, and instructed them to lay down and hide.
Very hard to explain to people that when you're running on adrenaline, I was able to leap 3 stairs at a time, and I was a big man, and for me to leap 3 stairs at a time, it takes a lot of physical strength. You have just about superpowers when you're running on adrenaline.
In just 10 minutes, the lone gunman had killed 6 people inside the cafe, 1 person outside the news agency, and dozens more were left injured throughout the plaza. His rampage was still ongoing as he made his way along the ramp and outside into the car park.
We do believe that the person with the gun had moved up onto the car park, which was removed from our area. So we looked out and it was just vacant.
I said, oh, he's there. And so I went outside and there was a young couple there. And I said, look, hit the deck. There's a gunman behind me and he's killing everybody.
Stay down. Stay down.
There was a lot of people still driving their cars around because they could hear the shots, but they didn't know what was going on. So I went around to each car and got everybody to stop what they're doing, just lay down flat in the car seat. When I was actually out in the first level car park, I was telling this lady to lay down on the seat flat, and she turned around and she said, too late, he's right behind you. He was about 20 yards away. In that sort of distance, you really couldn't miss. He didn't fire straight away. And I looked at him and he didn't fire, so I said, well, you've got to leap sideways. And that's what I did. When I leapt, he fired.
Greg Reed's courageous efforts caught him in the gunman's path once again. Instinctively leaping to what he hoped was safety, the bullets tore through the air as he hit the ground.
And that's why I got shot in the feet, because he caught me going through the air.
I did go out after some time. I did go out in the back alleyway out to the dock and looked up, and I could see the gunman standing on the stairs which led from the car park of the plaza into the administration building. When I looked up, it was just, to me, it was a man with a gun, just looking out over the car park. I don't think he could see me or didn't recognise that I was there because I very tentatively looked outside the dock. And as soon as I sighted him, I then moved back inside. And if there was only one person with a gun, and at that stage we didn't know, I at least knew where that person was.
In just 10 minutes, the unidentified gunman had discharged over 50 rounds of ammunition and showed no signs of stopping.
I wasn't aware that I'd been shot, and there was no blood coming from anywhere out of my body or anything like that. So I was very focused, and the only thing I was focused on was to save people's lives. Being that focused, I thought the only thing that I can do is use my car to try and run the gunman down.
As the gunman lost focus, the frustration and defeat were evident to those who witnessed his actions. Firing aimlessly at stationary targets, the gunman then fired shots from the car park roof in an effort to inflict further impact.
I've no doubt that he wanted to kill a lot of people, but it's a lot harder to hit targets than you think, particularly with the emotion that went along with it.
There was a whole lot of more shots that were fired. He fired some in the direction of Strathfield Station, and then he went over to the employment service and he tried to shoot the lockout on a set of aluminium doors. And of course, you know, he obviously didn't understand that where the locking mechanism were, really very amateurish. He displayed that, one, by not being able to shoot me at a very short distance for a start. The other part was the way he was doing it. It wasn't the way people do it in real life.
I imagine he was just forming that idea as he went along. He was running out of steam. Let's say, was running down, that he'd done what he intended to do, and this was like an aftermath and a winding up.
The gunman's next move would horrify everybody nearby as he set his sights on an unsuspecting woman driving her car.
He'd actually kidnapped another person and got her to drive the car, and she was driving down the ramp.
Strathfield Plaza had become a scene of carnage and devastation. In just 10 minutes, a lone man with a knife and a semi-automatic gun had indiscriminately attacked shoppers, killing 7 and injuring dozens more. From the rooftop car park, he fired at people below before his actions took a dramatic twist when he took a woman hostage.
As I was coming down towards the car, I noticed another vehicle on its way down.
The man was in the car with me and with the gun 10 centimetres from my face. And then he said, "Stop." And I stopped, and I thought, this is it. And then all of a sudden he made this very heartfelt apology and said, "I'm really sorry."
Yes, I don't understand the apology. I've seen many criminals apologise and say they were sorry. Mostly they were sorry they were caught. And I think what Wade was feeling was a bit of a rush of emotion at what he'd done. I don't think there was much guilt, because I don't think these people feel much guilt.
After a terrifying few minutes, the gunman unexpectedly changed his mind, apologised and got out of the woman's car.
He sort of kept walking over towards the other cars, and I heard a single shot.
Of course, he had to disappear off the stage in the right manner, rather than be caught and locked up and tried and so on.
As emergency services scrambled to help the injured, police steeled themselves to understand the enormity and scale of the gunman's actions. In just 15 minutes, 8 people were dead, 6 people lay wounded, and dozens more were traumatised and in shock. Survivors of the Strathfield Massacre came to realise how fortunate they had been.
He shot me through the heel, and going through the heel, I was just lucky that he hadn't picked another type of shell to use, and it could have been a lot worse.
If it's possible to mobilise the ambulance chaplain and possibly also the police chaplain.
It was all done within such a short space of time. I think the first police were there just before he shot himself.
The ambulances were all at the entrance to the plaza in the boulevard, whereas we got out the corner door. So we didn't see any of that. We only saw one person. Our little Rachel said, "Oh, I have never seen a dead person before." And I thought, gee, I need to get her home and away. We had no idea how many people had been hurt or what had happened, except we saw this man. That's all we knew.
And we came up to here, our home, and we brought Rachel up here and rang her parents to tell them that she was safe, and they came over and picked it up.
We just wanted to get home. I said, now I feel safe. Then I think we just sat down and had a cup of tea, didn't we? I think we started to feel perhaps then how bad it had been and how lucky we were to still be here.
As police and media descended on the plaza, for those involved, the shock had started to set in.
It just shifts the whole of society, I feel, and it definitely shifted the Strathfield community to a point where the community bonded.
Everybody was still in shock.
When something like this happens in a community, nearly everyone is touched in some way, to one degree or another.
It wasn't just the children who had fears, it was the teachers. It was the whole Strathfield community, extended community, that really did pull together.
We all had businesses there. It was our livelihood. We wanted everything to go back to what we were used to before the event happened.
There were a lot of people who would never come back there again, and I've heard people say even now they never went back there again.
That's the scary thing that I thought, that we all thought, you know, where are we safe? If we're not safe in Woolies doing our shopping on a Saturday morning, where can we be safe?
Within just 10 short minutes, 7 people's lives had been cut short before the killer turned the gun on himself. 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, 61-year-old Joyce Nixon, 36-year-old Patricia Rowe, 51-year-old George Mavris, 47-year-old Carol Dickinson, 17-year-old Rachel Milburn, and 51-year-old Robertson Can Hock Voon. 2 of the Strathfield Massacre victims killed in the cafe came from Sussex Inlet, a small coastal town south of Sydney. The violent massacre at Strathfield was as devastating as it was difficult to understand. Never before had Sydney witnessed such a sadistic crime, and people justifiably wanted answers. Why would a man with no police record, no history of violence, no obvious motive, commit such a savage and ruthless attack?
I can't say why a man would do that, and we'll never know. We might try and guess and maybe probe the guy's history. This sort of stuff just takes us by surprise. And why did he do what he did? We didn't know, and yet it happened.
Sydney resident and eminent forensic psychiatrist Dr. Rod Milton was called to participate in the inquiry into the mass murder after the gunman took his own life. Dr. Milton built a profile of the deceased gunman and helped to identify any motivating factors to this senseless massacre.
There'd been a lot of shooting and quite a few deaths, and my job was to investigate the perpetrator and form an opinion as to what motivated him to do it and what influences were relevant. It was an awful tragedy with the bodies lying there. It was just an awful scene.
The gunman was identified as 33-year-old Wade Frankum, a part-time taxi driver who lived in North Strathfield, just 3 kilometres away. Previously unknown to the police, with no distinguishing qualities or personality traits, it seemed Wade had achieved very little in his life. With nothing outstanding in his background, the authorities struggled to determine a motive for his rampage.
The scene itself was not that important as it happened. What was really important was the people I interviewed about Wade Frankum. The officer that was assigned to me took me about, and I saw Wade Frankum's relatives. I even saw the prostitutes that he used to frequent because they were very kind. They volunteered to come and be interviewed. I saw lots of his friends, employers, doctors. It was possible to get a very wide spectrum of people that had had a lot to do with Wade and to form what seemed to me quite a comprehensive picture of what this chap was like.
Psychiatrists have revealed the 33-year-old part-time taxi driver was being treated for depression, but they have few other clues to his personality.
The main thing about Wade was, like many of these people, he was a failure. Wade thought he was a lot better than he was and thought he could do a lot better, and of course when he didn't, he got cranky. And I think it was that caused him to do the killings. His sister said that he never really showed much feeling to him. He'd get upset about something, but he'd hold it in.
Gaynor Frankum told the inquest she and her brother had a strict upbringing. During their school years, their parents would lock them in their rooms to study. Even when you did achieve, if you got 99%, they'd say, "What happened to the 1%?
He was a bit dyslexic and he didn't get on terribly well at the private school that he went to. And certainly the dyslexia was an important element. If that had been corrected, perhaps he wouldn't have been so bad.
As Dr. Milton built the profile, he sensed Wade's upbringing and parents' behaviour could have had a decisive impact in shaping him into the man he became.
Wade had a background of success, but the parents, I think, affected him in 2 ways. One was their distance from him and his mother's unpredictability in emotion and love and that kind of thing. There was this wretched business with his mother being unpredictable and given to rages and drinking more than she should have done and smoking a lot. And the father, I think, not being able to cope with this, being a bit distant from it. The other was that they regarded him too highly and that he then thought he was capable of much more than he was.
Wade Frankum's mother was an alcoholic who had suffered a severe chronic mood disorder. In April 1990, just 16 months before the massacre, she committed suicide, leaving Wade devastated. Wade inherited $30,000 after his mother's death, buying a stereo and a video, and spending the rest on the services of prostitutes.
I think Wade felt bad about himself generally, and I think he had some doubts about his sexuality, but he was capable of some normal sexual responses. How much, we're not quite sure, because he had the prostitutes do things to him that suggested homosexuality, but the fact that he had girls do it suggested that he needed to be associated with women rather than men.
Looking back over his behaviour, Wade Frankum took steps towards preparations for the ensuing carnage. Having purchased a semi-automatic rifle, he had his knife sharpened in July, while his hair was cut exceptionally short the day before the massacre in August 1991.
I suspect that buying the gun meant he had thoughts about using it, and then he bought 100 rounds of ammo and Certainly he formed his ideas clearly by the time he got the knife sharpened and wanted a better edge on it and that kind of thing. But then as he ran out of money and ran out of a supply of girls that he could pay, I think he felt desperate because sex was a good outlet for him and perhaps an only outlet. And I think it was sort of building up to a climax.
In 1991, 33-year-old Wade Frankum spent just 10 minutes murdering innocent people as they shopped at Strathfield Plaza. Armed with over 100 rounds of ammunition and a knife, he killed 7 people before turning the gun on himself. As the victims were mourned, experts delved into Frankum's past for any clues to his behaviour. After spending his inheritance on prostitutes, things had become desperate for Frankum.
As the money ran out, then that's when it would build up to a final, what he would regard as a success. Many of these people do regard the killing as success at the end of a life of failure. That was part of the one successful event in his life.
On the morning of the massacre, Wade Frankum caught a train from North Strathfield Station. Here, he chillingly warned the station guard he knew by name to go home. Arriving at Strathfield Plaza at 1 p.m, Wade sat for hours inside the cafe, contemplating his next move, and then, without warning, launched into a shocking attack. Wade Frankum stabbed 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong before reaching for the gun and shooting Joyce Nixon and daughter Patricia Rowe, cafe owner George Maveris and Carol Dickinson, and her 17-year-old niece, Rachel Milburn. Wade then headed out into the plaza, firing at those who fled. 51-year-old Robertson Can Hock Voon was killed outside the news agency, with dozens injured from bullet wounds. The entire massacre took less than 15 minutes. The Strathfield Massacre in 1991 claimed 8 lives and injured scores of innocent people. Amidst calls for urgent gun law reform, the heroic deeds of one man were recognised. Greg Reed's incredible bravery at the shopping plaza that day helped save over 10 lives. A year later, he was rewarded with the Star of Courage.
You feel very humble when you're amongst all the other recipients of Australian honours and award system. Yeah.
I think it's one of the virtues of humanity that people do these things unthinkingly of the consequences, but to help their fellow person.
It makes you proud. It makes you proud to be an Australian.
The Strathfield Massacre sparked debate about the sale and ownership of guns that would culminate in the banning of semi-automatic weapons just 5 years later, a legislation enforced by Prime Minister John Howard after the 1996 Port Arthur tragedy. Greg Reed's Star of Courage was well-deserved and a proud and dignified moment of celebration in an otherwise horrific memory. As families prepared to bury and remember their loved ones, the small community of Sussex Inlet on the New South Wales coast gathered to say farewell to 2 of the victims in a public show of love and support.
In 1991, I was the assistant minister in the parish of Milton Ulladulla with Sussex Inlet. And I can say it was quite daunting to be responsible for the funeral service for Joyce and Patricia. I've not done anything in front of that many people before. There was roughly 1,000, they tell me. I think there were 600 inside the building, another, 400 outside that couldn't fit in. The community is a bit like a bit of an extended family. They're not related, but they're related by friendship.
Despite surviving the tragic events, Greg Reed suffered personally from what he had experienced.
And what I found is I suffered post-traumatic stress from it, and to get relief, it takes a long time, and it's not something you get over in 5 minutes.
Working and talking to these people and living with the people that survived, meeting people like Greg, you realise that this story is such a big part of their life.
The incident is still very live in your mind, and you still remember it frequently.
For anyone involved in a public tragedy, commemorating the memory highlights the significance of those who sadly lost their lives and the strength of those who survived. A public acknowledgement of the event and educational scholarships in memory of the victims helps to remember a tragic time with dignity and sensitivity.
We've consulted the community about, particularly the victims' families, etc., about how they want to commemorate, how they want to move forward, and that's how we came up with the annual ceremony.
Every year for the last 25 years I've been going there and having a memorial service at 11 o'clock. The problem is on August the 17th every year I feel really unusual feelings on that day. Something like this shouldn't be forgotten, and we shouldn't sweep things under the carpet and say they didn't happen.
During the ceremony I just cried.
Any loss of life is tragic, particularly one on the threshold of all it has to offer. Wade Frankum's first victim that fateful day was also the youngest. 15-year-old Roberta Armstrong, affectionately known as Bowie to her family and friends, was a talented and much-loved student at the MacDonald College in North Strathfield. The college decided to establish a scholarship in her loving memory.
The Roberta Armstrong Scholarship is probably valued at around about $25,000, so it's a very valuable scholarship and certainly supports a family and that student throughout the coming year. That to us is how the name lives on, and we award the scholarship at speech night at the end of every year, and up until quite recently Bowie's father or her mother would come and award the scholarship on that night.
Over 20 years after the tragedy, Roberta and all the victims will never be forgotten, and the community of Strathfield has endeavoured to work hard to move forward and rebuild.
We just carried on with our life as we were before and said, well, this is what we have to do. We have to do it.
I think it's important for us to remember that something has happened in the community, but we've actually got over that hurdle and we've rebuilt ourselves.
I think we're both fairly optimistic people, and I often say that I'm more concerned about tomorrow rather than what happened yesterday. We can't do anything about that. Let's move on.
Personally, for myself, I've always found that talking about the Strathfield Massacre in 1991 is a way of me being able to come to terms with being involved in the massacre and being able to convince other people also to have a better society for all of us.